Greater Sydney has been in lockdown since June the 26th. That's now 5 weeks. And this week it was announced that there's still another 4 to go. Although if infection numbers are any indication, there could be many, many more weeks after that before we get out of lockdown. Now, other cities and parts of Australia have also experienced lockdown this year and may well again before the year is out. Now, while our nation as a whole experienced lockdown in 2020, and Melbourne, of course, experienced its awful second wave, this time it just feels different. I mean, yes, there's the isolation. Yes, there's the homeschooling. Yes, there's the online church. But this time round, people feel like they're over it. The novelty is well and truly gone. There's rising levels of anger, there's anxiety, there's frustration. And if you're watching this video from Greater Sydney right now, I'm guessing that you're feeling one of those emotions as we speak. And so you might be asking yourself, how on earth am I going to make it through this extended lockdown? Well, hi there, my name's Psychologist Sarah Balogh and I'm the CEO of the Gospel Coalition Australia. Welcome to this special TGCA video. I'm joined by a psychologist, a Moore College chaplain, and most importantly, my wife, Sarah Balogh. Thanks so much for coming on.
Oh, look, I'm just really excited to be out of the house. What can I say?
Yes, being out of the house, what a novelty. Who would have thought? Now, I've got to say, TGCA, we don't believe in nepotism, but in these days of lockdown, she was the only person that I could actually speak to like this. And if I may say so, I think she's the best person for the job. Oh. But hey, I'm biased. Well, anyway, in this video, we'll be sharing 5 tips that will help you as you get through extended lockdown. Now, Sarah will be sharing from the field of psychology, as so much of lockdown is a mental game. There are so many mental health aspects to it. But because psychology has so much common grace in it, we'll also be speaking the words of the Bible to these 5 tips as well. So let's dive right in. Tip number 1. Tip number 1, be sad about sad things. Lament is healthy.
Yeah. Look, I think that's something we actually often say to our children, to be sad about sad things. And I think sometimes as Christians, we would like to, kind of skip over the emotion and just get to the end where we trust God. But I think actually, the psalmists actually lament a lot, and I think it's good to actually feel our feelings and to process our feelings so that they're to be aware of what those feelings are and how to manage them. So I think it's actually a good thing.
Yeah, it's so important. It's interesting when you read the Psalms, like, for example, Psalm 73, one of my favourite Psalms. At the very beginning, the psalmist says, "But as for me, my feet had almost stumbled, my steps had nearly slipped, for I was envious of the arrogant when I saw the prosperity of the wicked." Like, he doesn't hold back at all. He just says it how he feels it.
He does. He does, indeed.
Yeah. But then it's interesting because he processes that and he ends up with a renewed trust in God. "Who have an eye in heaven but you, and earth has nothing I desire besides you." So he actually goes through a process there, doesn't he? He starts with lament, but he processes it and finishes with faith in God.
Yeah, and process and reflection are things that actually really help us as we try to be godly in what is a really, really tricky time. So, there's lots of, you can journal, you can maybe you're a verbal processor, and some of us, we process things differently, but there's certainly different ways that we can process our emotions, and I think that's a healthy thing.
Yeah. What happens if someone doesn't process their emotions?
Look, I think that we can just then act out of, not knowing what our patterns are of behaviour, and I think sometimes that can lead to frustration and explosions of emotion, perhaps. So knowing ourselves well actually helps us to control our emotions too, I think.
Fantastic. It's so important to be able to process those emotions well. Next point, focus on what's inside your locus of control. What on earth does that mean?
Some people you might have heard the word, to focus on what's in your control. You might have heard that bandied around a bit, and that is certainly true. But I think there is something that we can kind of expand a little bit more even about locus of control that might help us. So sure. I might actually get up to the whiteboard, which is my happy place, if that's all right. So with locus of control, basically we're talking about things that are inside our control and things that are outside of our control. So what might be some things that are inside our control, Arcos?
Inside our control might be things like our actions, what we choose to do with ourselves.
Yeah. So actions and what we do. Yeah. So how we might have a feeling, but then we actually have a choice about what we might do with that feeling and how we might behave. What about things that are outside our control?
Well, look, in the current context, the government's policy on lockdowns is definitely outside of our control.
Yep. What else would be outside of our control?
The pandemic, what's happening to COVID, what it's doing.
Yep. Absolutely. So there's stuff that's inside our control and there's things that are outside of our control. What do you think might happen if you focus on things that might be outside our control in terms of the pandemic, the everyday statistics, kind of dwelling on all those things or trying to control those things? If we try and control things that are outside of our control, what do you think we might feel?
Oh, look, I think we can all relate to this. We'd feel frustration.
Absolutely.
Because we're not able to control the things that we feel like we want to control.
Yeah. What else might we feel?
We might get anxious. We might feel anxious that
Absolutely.
these things are outside of our control, doing things to us that we don't want to happen.
Absolutely. And there's so much, so much that's outside of our control at the moment. And so we're likely to feel much more anxious than we ordinarily would. Yeah. What else? Stress?
Stress, yes, absolutely.
So lots of kind of, I
Negative,
suppose.
very negative things.
Sometimes they can be negative, not always, but yes.
Yep.
What about, I'm going to just get a different marker, different colour. What about if we focus on things that are inside our control?
We feel often a sense of empowerment that we can actually do this.
Yep. So we might feel more empowered. We might feel like we can do it, so it might be doable.
Doable, we might get a sense of confidence.
Yep.
Yep. Perhaps a sense of meaning and purpose because we're able to do those things, depending on what they are.
What about things like time? So past, present, future. Where do you think we'd put them?
Yeah, certainly the past is something outside of our control.
Yep.
The future, something that's yet to happen, that's, I think, something out of our control as well.
And it's interesting, isn't it? Like, if we think about that just for a second, what are the things that we usually worry about?
The future, tomorrow.
Absolutely. And it's funny, you know, we'll talk about what Jesus says about that later. But what about past, future, what about present?
Present, yeah. By and large, I think that's inside of our control.
Yeah. And there's a lot of talk in psychology about presence in terms of mindfulness, and sometimes Christians can get a little bit scared of that word and not sure what it means. But if we look at somewhere like Matthew 6, where Jesus says, don't worry about tomorrow because tomorrow's got enough worries of itself, that's presence, yeah. That's mindfulness. And Jesus, I say Jesus is the king of mindfulness.
That's right, he focuses on what we can control. Yeah,
just do today, one day at a time, you'll do fine. Yep. So I guess if we start to feel a lot of these feelings, which we're already feeling in lockdown, then a really good question to ask ourselves is what I'm feeling stressed about, what I'm feeling anxious about, or what I'm feeling frustrated about, is that in my control? And if the answer is no, then it's really good if you can try and find something that is in your control. So it might be picking up the phone and ringing a friend. That's in your control because it's in your actions. It's things you can do. It might be, for me, the other day I was feeling really frustrated. I got my clippers out and did some stuff in the garden that I hadn't had time to do in a long time. And it's a simple thing, but staying in our control will just help us as we try and manage the vast array of emotions that are happening at the moment.
It's interesting. One of the things I think about is so much of this will hinge on where you put your focus.
Yeah.
What you focus on, where you direct your attention to. And interestingly enough, where we direct our attention, that's very much within our control.
Yeah. So we can't necessarily, some of our thoughts and our feelings are really automatic, the way we feel about things. But what we do about those thoughts or about those feelings, that's where we have more control.
Yep. So from a theological perspective, as the psalmist does, they look at all these challenges that they're facing in their world, and they direct their attention not merely to the challenges, although they do start with that, they direct their attention to God, to the one who is in control of everything.
Yeah, that's a really cool thing about this, actually. If I'm doing this with a client who is not a Christian, I don't go to the whole God stuff. But the really cool thing about being Christians is that, of course, we can put a massive, massive thing around this and say, you know what? Who's in control of all this stuff?
Yeah, God.
God, which is fantastic. And something that, you know, Jesus says, all those who are weary and burdened and laboured, come to me and you'll find rest. So that's something to really just be mindful of.
Yeah, and I think there's a real pastoral application for us as we direct our attention to God and his sovereign control over it. I think that's something that will more than likely help calm us down during these anxious times.
Yeah, because he is in control, and so we can rest in that.
Excellent. All right.
Hopefully that's helpful.
Yep, so focus on what's inside your locus of control. Point number 3. Here we go. Be a non-anxious presence to those around you. Be a non-anxious presence to those around you. What does it mean to be a non-anxious presence?
It's a funny word, isn't it? A non-anxious presence. You know, if any of you are parents, and some of you will be, it's really very easy when the emotional temperature around you rises, or your children are having a hissy fit, it's the second meltdown of the day, it's really easy for us to then react to that emotion, to raise with that emotion, and to become a really anxious presence, actually. It's easy to react. And so what that means is actually, it's a little bit like, you know, self-control in terms of the fruit of the Spirit. Fruit of the Spirit, Ephesians 5. That's it. It's actually trying to be a non-anxious presence, a calming presence when everything around us is chaos. And for our kids, this is a really tricky time. And it doesn't even need to be your kids. You know, whatever system you're in, whether it's your family or your friends or any relationships that you have an opportunity, I would say, to try and be a calm presence. Doesn't mean you're always going to get it right, because we're always going to get it wrong sometimes. But to be trying to do that, I think, is a godly thing as well. There'll be a lot of people out there that are thinking, look, I'm trying to be calm, but I don't feel calm. I feel anxious. There's a low-level anxiety that I'm feeling throughout this lockdown. Can they still be a non-anxious presence, even though they feel anxious? That's a great question, Marcus. I think absolutely. You can still feel anxious, yet be projecting. You know, even just things like your tone of voice is a massive thing in your house. I know that if I start to raise my tone with our children, for example, that things get out of control really quickly. They start to get agitated as well, and they escalate. Their behaviour escalates as well, and so it ends up in a pretty nasty place if we kind of let it all kind of continue. So it is tricky, and look, I would say, to be kind to yourself as well in these times. Don't expect yourself to get it always right. But there's always people in our churches, and also there's a lot of telehealth that's available through mental health care plans these days. And if you're really finding it tough, then absolutely reach out. You know, it's not an easy thing to do, to be a non-anxious presence, but it's very powerful. Yeah, so reach out to the local psychology or GP help, and also reach out to church as well. Yeah, absolutely. Yep. Talk with someone, pray with someone. Yeah. Okay. I mean, it reminds me of Paul's advice to Timothy in 2 Timothy chapter 4, verse 5. The NIV puts it this way: "But you, Timothy, keep your head in all situations." Now, I'm presuming Paul didn't say to him there, you must never feel anxious, you must never feel like things are getting out of control. He's saying, keep your head in all situations, no matter how you might be feeling. Yeah. Hard. Timothy knows it's hard, though. It's why he's saying it. He's exhorting us to do it. Yeah. We need God's help to do that. Yeah. Okay, point number 4, have a regular routine. Have a regular routine. And I think people probably have picked this up through, you know, lockdowns last year, and also this is not rocket science, this one. But what we do know about mental health is that routine is really important. So to try and have routine in your days. And the other thing is make sure you've got something to look forward to. There's so much in this lockdown that is not fun. Whether it doesn't really matter whether it's a walk, whether it's takeaway night at your house, whether it's a movie. Movie night at our place, Friday nights, end of the week. Yep. Friday night, movie night, the kids get excited. You know, just things, every day, something to look forward to, I think is really important.
Yeah, it's very interesting that the way God made us as image bearers, he gave us the Sabbath each and every week, recurring. So he made us as creatures of routine. And I think we do best when we align our lives with that routine aspect of our creatureliness.
Especially in a lockdown where there's very little routine. So reclaim that where you can and make that as, that's something that is actually in your control as well. The days and the routines and how you choose to spend your time.
Yeah. Is it worth saying a few specific things about sleep, for example, going to sleep at similar times, waking up similar times?
We could, Arcos, but that might take us off on a whole
Take us on a new tangent. But anyway, there you go. There's lots of things.
We'll just do 5 tips today. This is not an exhaustive list, but yeah.
But something to think about. All right, tip number 5, look for opportunities for connection. Look for opportunities for connection.
Yeah, so one of the pillars of mental health is connection. And certainly in lockdown, we're just like very, very isolated. So whatever opportunities you can find for connection, go with it. If it's, I know we don't love Zoom, but one of the things that I have found really helpful, and even at college with students, is using the phone more and not being on screens. I think screens take us a lot more energy and a lot more emotional energy to use sometimes. Find your medium and use that. But also, when we focus too much inwardly on ourselves, we can very easily slip into rumination, which is overthinking things or having unhelpful kind of patterns of thinking and behaviour. So sometimes looking outside of yourself is really helpful as well. So looking to the care of others is always a fantastic thing for your mental health even. But of course, Jesus commands us to do that too, doesn't he? In terms of looking after our brothers and sisters, that's a great way to kind of take the focus off lockdown. And also it's within your locus of control too. So
yeah, I mean, as Sarah said, the Bible exhorts us to, doesn't it? Galatians 6:10, as you have opportunity, do good to all people, especially those of the household of believers. And I think it's worth saying as well that I think the temptation is that we're in lockdown, we're kind of like in hibernation, we'll just let those relationships sit, we won't attend to them, and we'll get back to them once we're out of lockdown.
Yes, limbo land.
Limbo land.
Just kind of surviving lockdown. I think we need to actually continue to just live our lives and to connect with others where we have the opportunity. Yeah,
and in particular as well, when it comes to the Great Commission, where Jesus told us to go and make disciples, that doesn't stop when we're in lockdown.
No.
But there's other ways that we can do this as well. Maybe, I think what we're finding is that people have more time because they're not running all over the place, kids' sport and so forth. So there's actually, people have more time to actually sit and chat. And boy, what are we finding as well in terms of just asking people how they are? And conversations can start from that.
Yeah, and we all have opportunities to connect with people in our streets, I think, at the moment. Certainly I have had lots more conversations with my neighbours recently. So we need to be looking for opportunities for that too.
Yeah, so many opportunities that are right there. We just need to be looking outside for them. All right, so 5 tips. There are 5 tips that will help you survive lockdown. Of course, there's a lot more that can be said, and hey, depending on the response, we might give some more out of a later date. But just so you know, 5 tips. First one, be sad about sad things. A lament is healthy, as long as that lament gets processed, of course. Second, focus on what's inside your locus of control. So focus your attention on the things you can't control, not on the things you can't control. Thirdly, be a non-anxious presence to those around you. So no matter how you feel, exude some calm, and that'll help the relationships around you. Number 4, have a regular routine. We're creatures of routine, so be sure to have one. Don't let it slip by the wayside. And number 5, look for opportunities for connection, both in terms of social connection with friends and family, but also in terms of gospel connections with other people.
Yeah, and within those 5 tips, just remember that this is it's a difficult time, and there will be a roller coaster of emotions. So try to be a bit kinder to yourself than you might ordinarily be as well, because Jesus was a very compassionate person, and I think compassion is something we shouldn't downplay during this time either.
Great words to finish on. Well, thank you so much, Sarah, for joining us. And thank you as well for joining us for this special Gospel Coalition Australia video. If you want more content from the Gospel Coalition Australia, just Google the Gospel Coalition Australia. That'll take you to our website, and from there you can check out all our other resources. Thanks so much for joining us.